We've designed drugs in general for things like IBD that entirely work based on the gut microbiome. Can we stop some of these interactions and positively change them between the drug and the gut microbiome? The gut microbiome sits in the intestine. The intestine's made of a membrane, as you can imagine, and the membrane is just...
Let's talk about smart longevity strategies. As a Gen X mum, founder and podcaster, my days can be long and demanding. That's why I love learning about longevity and cellular wellness breakthroughs that work hard and smart. Time Capsule by Melrose Future Lab is the first TGA-listed all-in-one longevity supplement. It combines 12 clinically backed ingredients in one daily formula to support energy, metabolism, cognition, cardiovascular health, bone strength, and antioxidant protection. Powered by Lipisperse and Verisperse for enhanced absorption, it includes niacinamide riboside for cellular energy, resveratrol antioxidant defense, and berberine to support glucose metabolism. Plus, essentials like activated B vitamins, magnesium, vitamin D3 with K2. Because real longevity is not just about one thing. It's sleep, nutrition, mindset, and yes, supplements. It's about everything working together. Time Capsule makes it simple.
I'm so delighted to have you on the podcast. When I saw the report coming through about this research that you're doing on the gut-brain axis, I was so excited because we've heard about it. You know, there's a lot of talk about the gut-brain axis and how it affects mental health, how it affects mood, cognition, and then you're working on this wonderful piece of research as a PhD candidate. So I would love for you to, first of all, set the scene with what your research is, and then we can get into the nuts and bolts of it.
Sure. Thank you for having me as well. So the crux of my research is essentially trying to understand or better understand how the gut microbiome inside of us, which is the hundreds and hundreds of trillions of bacteria, interact with the brain. You're very right in saying that there is a very intimate relationship between the two. We don't really know what the relationship looks like. We just know that the bacteria in our stomachs can control our mood, our cognition, how we feel, why we feel, etc. And the brain can in turn impact the bacteria and make a better environment or a worse environment for them. So this bidirectional relationship, we call it, that's essentially what I'm studying, and how we can control that reaction or interaction, to make better medication or safer medication.
The thing that was really fascinating to me is I didn't understand that it went the other way as well. So my understanding of it was fix your gut, get the gut microbiomes fixed, and then you have the solution. But I didn't realize the brain could also affect the gut microbiome. Can you share a little bit more about that part of the equation? Because that's not something that we hear about.
No, certainly, absolutely. I mean, you're right in saying many people would have heard that having a good microbiome impacts your mental health. Certainly it does. But the brain, you can imagine, controls most things in the body. And that includes things like, for example, hormone production. And the hormones that it produces, directly and indirectly, actually affect the gut environment to change the pH, to change the availability of resources. All those things intimately affect the bacteria that are living there. So you can make a more, toxic or a worser environment for the bacteria, and you have a poorer ecosystem. Or you can have a better environment, have better bacteria. And so why that's important is things like sleep, things like your mental health status. If you're stressed, for example, all those situations affect the brain, and thus the hormone production, cortisol production, etc., which then go off to affect the bacteria. I'll admit that's a pathway we know less about than how the gut microbiome impacts the brain.
Can you talk to me about, you mentioned hormones. It'll be great to talk about some of the hormones that the brain does control that can impact the gut microbiome.
Yeah, so the main one is cortisol, because cortisol is involved with obviously stress. So you can imagine when you're stressed, you feel worse in general. But in this case, cortisol is involved with how well the gut microbiome's So the gut microbiome sits in the intestine. And the intestine's made of a membrane, as you can imagine, and the membrane is just cells that are tied together. Cortisol can actually weaken that membrane and pull those cells apart a little bit. And so what that means is essentially you're getting things that are moving past the gut that shouldn't otherwise be doing so. It's what we call a leaky gut. So cortisol can influence that. Things like, for example, GLP-1, which obviously is probably the hottest hormone in the world right now with things like Ozempic. Yeah, So the brain can influence the production of GLP-1, which then influences the gut microbiome environment through production of, for example, pH changes, other metabolites. So it's a very complicated system, and I'll be the first to admit we don't fully understand how it works from the brain.
In your research, are you also researching the impact of hormones, female hormones such as estrogen on the gut and testosterone on the gut-brain axis? Because one of the things I'm really keen to explore with you, my show is called Ageless, and the majority of my audience are women over 40. And so they're going through perimenopause, menopause. There's a lot of conversation around estrogen depletion, testosterone depletion as we age and go through menopause. Has your studies also looked at those hormones?
We've touched on it a little bit in the sense that we've seen when we do a study that, for example, if it's in animals, we'll see that the female animals will respond differently to the male animals. So we call that a sex-dependent sort of behavior. So we've seen that that's the case, and we know that it occurs, but the why is a little bit more difficult. We know the gut microbiome pretty much has a relationship with every organ in the body, and that includes, in this case, the sex organs. And so we know that the microbiome can influence the production of estrogen, testosterone, and vice versa. They can influence the intestinal membrane again, but the actual specifics of that relationship is less understood. I feel like a lot of the answers today will be, we're not quite sure. We know it occurs, but we're not quite sure how it happens.
Well, to me, it's really interesting. And one of the things I do love to do on the show is to invite scientists and researchers onto the show, because just because it isn't here yet doesn't mean it's not worth discussing. And I think that it does give hope to people who have perhaps found the medical system hopeless
Absolutely.
because it lacks that precision that we're going to talk about. And as I understand, your research is really focused on finding the core markers and finding what changes so that we can administer more precision medication, more timely medication if medication is indeed required, or manage it in a more holistic way if it can be managed through nutrition, through sleep, through lifestyle. Am I correct in my understanding?
Certainly, absolutely. Every one of us has a very unique ecosystem of bacteria inside of us, like a DNA print. And so, if you're able to understand that, you're able to personalize the medication in a way that, for example, the regular healthcare may not be able to do so.
So, going back to the core reason for your study, obviously mental health is an enormously important and topical subject to discuss, and the research that you're doing could profoundly impact people's lives. Can you share more about what your findings are leading you to, I guess, discover around gut microbiome and medication?
So we've known for obviously when you take a mental health medication, whether it be antidepressant, anti-schizophrenic, etc., we've known for a long time that of course it affects the brain. We just didn't know that it also affects the gut microbiome. But it makes sense. Anything you take by the mouth, tablet, medication, food, pretty much has to go through your gut, which means it has to go through the gut microbiome. And so anytime that happens, there's a reason for interaction. And so we didn't quite click onto the fact that, of course, these mental health medications have to go through the gut microbiome and there may be interactions. And it turns out there are interactions, good and bad. And I can give you examples of both. But, you know, there's good interactions in the sense the gut microbiome can change the drugs that we take to make them more effective. In fact, we've designed drugs in general for things like IBD, it's a little bit unrelated, but IBD that entirely work based on the gut microbiome. We take the tablet, the microbiome unlocks the medication, makes it work in the gut. That's good interactions, and we want more of those. And our
What's
research is tailored.
IBD for? I don't know what IBD is.
Sorry, into inflammatory bowel disease.
Right. Got it.
So the symptoms that some patients call, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, things like that. We use a medication called 5-ASA for it. And essentially, the microbiome inside of us unlocks and splits the molecule in half, allowing it to actually work. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So we've been able to harness the gut microbiome in the past for that. And using lessons like those, we want to now apply them to the mental health sphere as well. But you go on.
No, it just made me think about the transplants that they've done where they transplant feces from someone with a healthy microbiome into someone who doesn't have that healthy microbiome, and then they're able to reset the gut microbiome. Is that part of your study as well?
Yeah, I was looking at more, can we take the transplant. We call it fecal microbiota transplant,
Yes.
FMT for short. It sounds very gross, and it certainly is a little bit
FMT
on the
sounds much better
much better.
than a
Absolutely.
poop transplant for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So the current way it's administered most likely is through enema. So by sticking a tube up the bottom, which is not the best way for most people. And so our research is also exploring, can we take that technology and make it into a tablet? So
Mm,
I know it still sounds disgusting to say eat, poop tablets, but if you close your eyes, I don't know if it'll be that bad.
okay. We'll
So the
take your word
idea,
for it.
exactly, yeah. So yeah, that's where our research is focusing on. But you're certainly right. We've done studies where we've taken it from a healthy donor to someone, for example, struggling with obesity, and we've seen them lose weight. But you can do it the other way around as well. And what that tells us is it's certainly something to do with the gut microbiome that's influencing it. We just don't know what it is. So we know that it's happening. We don't know why it's happening, how it's happening. But we have an idea in the sense that you can imagine the microbiome inside of us interacts with the food we eat. It breaks down the food, breaks down the fats that we eat, is involved with metabolism. So it may be that certain people who are struggling with, say, obesity, but also this applies to other conditions like depression, their gut microbiome just may not be functioning appropriately, may not be breaking down the fats properly, or helping produce the right hormones or the right chemicals. So by replacing the gut microbiome entirely with someone who is functioning appropriately, the gut microbiome, you may be able to revert their condition and help, to some extent, aid their journey back to being normal.
So almost like stem cell therapy, where you introduce
Exactly.
youthful stem cells into a site or into a body, and then those healthy youthful stem cells reset the behavior of the donor, the recipient, and they reset the behavior of the cells to act in a more youthful or healing or whatever reason the stem cell is being applied. I find that
Exactly. Yeah.
so fascinating, and I think what I like about this conversation is that one, it allows for precision medication, hopefully down the track, and an evolution of how drugs are made. And secondly, the idea that we don't have to go to medication. It could be, I think it's autologous. Is that the
Mhm.
word? Where
Mhm.
you use from your own body or from other stem cells or other, donors to manage, serious health issues. Back to your study on mental health, one of the things that comes up a lot for women, certainly, again, I'll relate it back to my audience,
Of course.
is that mental health can be late onset. It doesn't have to be something that, you grew up with. It could be, but if it is late onset as a result of menopause or as a result of, life change or diet change or a genetic predisposition that hits you later in life. Um, and there's a massive resistance to wanting to take any kind of medication for mental health. So I'd love you to share more about what your findings are around the drug side of things when it comes to mental health drugs.
Yeah, sure. And I certainly get the resistance. So I don't know if I've mentioned, but I was a registered pharmacist before I started my research. And in that, I saw that a lot of patients, when they were first taking the medications for mental health, for example, antidepressants for depression, there was a lot of pushback. I mean, the idea of a drug impacting your brain is a bit of a scary thought. But my research is focused on, well, the side effects of those medications. Can we try to reduce some of those side effects and
Mm.
make those medications more tolerable so that patients are more likely to stay on them if they need them, for example? So what I mean by that is what we realized is, and I said about the positive interactions before, but there are also negative interactions between the gut microbiome and the drug. What that looks like, sorry, is antidepressants, very popular, very commonly used medication. They actually kill off the bacteria in our stomach. And so what that means is, again, you're put into a state where your body can no longer regulate its fats properly, no longer produces hormones. And so some of these patients gain up to 10% body fat in 12 weeks. It's a noticeable amount.
12 weeks. Wow.
Yeah, it's a very noticeable amount in a noticeably short period of time. So that's not a sort of burden that we want to put onto patients that are already vulnerable, especially patients that for the majority of their life, they may have been fine. And now all of a sudden they've been given, diagnosed with depression, late onset in life, as you mentioned. And so it's not a burden that we want to put on. So the research is now looking at, can we stop some of these interactions and positively change them between the drug and the gut microbiome to reduce some of the weight? And it turns out that we definitely can. So the main idea here is, can we incorporate prebiotics which is dietary fiber. So the idea behind dietary fiber is it's so low risk, right? It's natural, no real drug
Absolutely.
involved. Absolutely. You can buy it from the chemist and it's just as effective. The idea is, can we incorporate that into the medication so that it feeds the bacteria and acts as a shield between the drug and the bacteria? So that's the sort of crux of the, I guess, research. And it turns out that it does work. If you supplement someone who's taking an antidepressant or antipsychotic with prebiotics, then you may see a reduction in their weight gain. And now it's just working towards, can we eliminate that weight gain overall?
My question to you is for people who are not on antidepressants and not taking medication. I mean, there's always been a massive body of research and work around prebiotics and increasing fiber to help the gut, to help digestion, to help weight management. Are there other, you talked about fiber. Is there a type of fiber that you are testing with that, that's easily available to anyone who's listening who can start taking this safely without any kind of negative impact?
Yeah, so long story short, inulin, Inulin. That's the exact type of fiber that we use. And you can buy it at a chemist or I think even at a supermarket.
Is that like
Essentially, it's
Metamucil or Inulin is the brand?
inulin is the actual name of the fiber itself. The
Right.
brand name can be whatever it wants to be, but the idea is it's slightly different to Metamucil in the sense that inulin is a different molecule that's more easily accessible for the bacteria to break down. And because of the way it's formulated, it means that it's able to promote a much greater ecosystem boost. Metamucil, for example, is not easily readily digestible for the bacteria. It's still great for you, but inulin is. And so our research is
And
focused on
Inulin
that.
is more specifically for the bacteria and the gut microbiome as a prebiotic.
Certainly it is, yes. But you can also find other ones, ZOS or xylo-oligosaccharide, long name, but you can also find that online as a supplement as well. So there are plenty of prebiotics, but inulin is the main one that we use.
So it's interesting that you're talking about prebiotics because the superstar in the biotics family is the probiotics. And so, for 30, 40 years, the French have, the Yakult drinks that they take. A lot of Middle Eastern cultures have kefir or some kind of ferment. I've just come back from Korea and fermented food is like the staple, the cornerstone of their diet. So are they probiotics? All of those things fall under the probiotics? Or are they
Yes.
also okay?
So yes, so fermented foods or the supplements that you buy, your quilt that you mentioned as well, all of those contain healthy bacteria, which is what we call probiotics. So the idea behind it is you're trying to not just feed the bacteria inside you, but also add good bacteria in. So that's the concept of probiotics. But I might add the caveat that what we've found through literature is that it's actually easier to feed the bacteria that are already there than it is to introduce new species. So that's a small caveat I'm at. I can go more into it if you want.
I would love you to. Yeah, why not? Let's
Yeah,
talk
sure.
about that.
Yeah, so the idea behind why probiotics may be a, I guess, less efficient path to go down from the majority of healthy individuals is because of what we call colonization resistance. So you can assume the bacteria in your stomach right now, they're already settled. They're very happy where they are. They've taken over the resources, the space. They're happy. But if you try to introduce new species, well, there's going to be a bit of pushback. The existing bacteria are going to have to make some room. They might not enjoy that, etc. So like any sort of social circumstance, there is going to be a bit of pushback. So what we've found, unfortunately, is with the majority of supplementation probiotics, so the capsules that you buy, you can take a whole bottle of capsule within a month. And within 2 weeks of stopping, unfortunately, you see the majority of the gut microbiome revert back to what it was originally.
I have a special ageless listener offer. Ready to simplify your longevity stack? Our season 11 sponsor, Melrose Future Lab, is offering ageless listeners 40% off your first time capsule order. Just use the code AGELESS at checkout. T's and C's apply, offered valid on one-time purchases of time capsule, only available now at melrosefuturelab.com.au.
Which is why we say fermented foods is an easier path to go down because you can have that as part of your diet and you can keep it consistent. Prebiotics are easy because there's a powder you can buy in a bulk form and it feeds the bacteria that are already there. But those capsule supplementation probiotics, which unless a health professional has prescribed it or recommended it, I would say for the majority of individuals that are healthy, it's probably not. I mean, you can certainly definitely do it, You just might be better off spending that money on prebiotics.
Back to the prebiotic conversation, is there a natural way, other than the fiber, to up the intake of prebiotics in your diet? So if someone is on medication or if, including GLP-1s, because you mentioned that that's affecting the brain, that's the brain hormone, and so many people are on GLP-1. So I would say that a lot of people who are listening to this conversation are tuning in for that as much as they are for the mental health side of things. Is there any kind of natural foods or like lifestyle changes that can support prebiotic uptake or prebiotic supplementation?
Yeah, so the list of foods that are high in fiber are probably endless. And to be honest, anything that we call, healthy, the cliche, eat healthy foods, the leafy greens, the nuts, etc., they're all high in fiber. So that's part of the reason why they're healthy. So certainly going down that avenue is great. Exercise, I hate to be cliche again, but exercise is also important because it allows the gut microbiome, it regulates gut microbiome activity and allows that to be as efficient as possible as well. So for someone trying to incorporate as much prebiotic as possible into their lifestyle, it would look like essentially having more leafy greens and more nuts as a snack. So that would be an easy way to do it. And again, I know we mentioned probiotics earlier, but yogurt and fermented foods like kimchi are two really easy ways to add probiotics as well. And I'm not saying probiotics are a waste. I'm just saying that things like fermented foods are a really easy way to add a bit more healthy bacteria into your diet as well. So there isn't a sort of golden answer. There is no secret ingredient. If you want to get in your diet, the healthy diet is the best way to go, the generic healthy diet that people think of.
Going back to GLP-1 and also cortisol, so talking about a couple of hormones that affect the gut, there's a huge body of commentary. I won't say research, I'll say commentary about the side effects of GLP-1 medication is the upset stomach, the nausea, the diarrhea. Is that wiping out good bacteria in the gut?
GLP-1 supplementation like
Mhm.
Ozempic
Mhm.
certainly has the opportunity to, but we've seen that because of the part of the way half the reason the GLP-1 works is through the gut. So it actually influences cells in the gut to trigger your brain to tell it that it's, full.
Cool. Yeah,
So the gut acting side, we've seen it alter gut microbiome profiles. Whether that means good or bad, we don't have enough literature to suggest yet.
got it.
But what we do know is that, to bring it back to the prebiotic conversation and not to harp on about it, but we've seen that supplementation of prebiotic actually increases the amount of GLP-1 naturally present in the gut. And so that may be part of the reason why some patients have actually lost weight whilst taking prebiotics. So there's a bit of a correlation between prebiotics and GLP-1 to tie them together. And cortisol, which you also mentioned as well, we've seen a reduction in cortisol in patients that are given prebiotics because the gut microbiome is able to regulate what we call the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a really big nerve that goes between the brain and the gut, with lots of thousands of branches in the gut and the brain. And essentially, it's part of the parasympathetic nervous system, so rest and digest, not fight and flight. And the idea is that prebiotics and healthy ecosystem in the gut is able to actually directly interact with that nerve and trigger the rest and digest and trigger the reduction in cortisol. So make you feel quite literally less stressed and more calm.
This is extraordinary. I've never had this conversation before, and it seems like something that we can all do, regardless of how we're feeling. One of the things that I read in the literature was, some of the effects of having a poor gut microbiome is, the brain fog, the depression, the moodiness, loss of memory. Are those all things that you are researching as part of your broader research to better understand why the gut, how the gut microbiome affects those things and how that gut brain axis is really so connected?
Absolutely, it is. So we've known for a while that, it does stuff to the brain. But part of understanding, how it does what it does is understanding what it does first. So what I mean by that is, of course, as you said, memory loss, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, predisposition to all of those is what we're trying to understand. So we need to understand what are those changes that we see in the gut microbiome? What are those changes we see in the brain? Is it a causal relationship? It's very hard to figure out if the gut microbiome is influencing particular change you see because there are 100 trillion bacteria in the stomach, and trying to map those relationships with every organ in the body is a nightmare of a task. But I might just say that certainly we've seen, because of the vagus nerve, because of the chemicals the bacteria produces, we've seen mechanisms by which it's feasible. Now the next step will be to say that it's caused by it. But again, things like what we spoke about earlier, the transplant of microbiome, steps like that suggest that it's definitely causal. And that's a lot of the research coming now is trying to determine if it's correlation or causation. But certainly we've seen that big studies like those suggest that it is definitely causal. And one of the reasons that it may be caused, and one of the ways the gut microbiome in general influences the brain, is the chemicals that it produces. So we know for a while that obviously they're living organisms, they produce chemicals. Those chemicals are absorbed by the body, go into the blood, and then affect the organs. We want a good ecosystem so that the good chemicals are produced. So that's the idea behind all of it. And that's how, that's one of the bases behind why we're trying to see how it impacts mental health, if that
And
makes
what
sense.
about serotonin? What is the role of a good gut microbiome and the production of serotonin?
Yeah, so serotonin, which I'm sure most people have heard of, pleasure hormone, happy hormone, it's in the brain. Same with dopamine as well. The brain produces it and it works in the brain, as I'm sure we all know. But in the gut microbiome also produces serotonin, dopamine, and a bunch of other neurotransmitters. But the same chemical can have different roles depending on where it is in the body. So in the gut, dopamine and serotonin act as caloric sensors, we say. So they tell your brain when it's full. They regulate appetite, a bit like GLP-1. And then they also regulate motility, so how your intestines are moving, how the bowels are working. And they directly interact with that vagus nerve that I spoke about earlier, the highway between the brain and the gut. And so it's important to have, a healthy amount of dopamine and serotonin in the gut like it is in the brain. And the
And
microbiome are heavily involved with making it. So
And this to me sounds groundbreaking and something that, we all need. And the thing that came to mind is like binge eating. So if you're not getting that satiation, if you're not getting that, you're binge eating not out of hunger, but to get the serotonin or to get the dopamine hit. So if you have a healthy gut microbiome that is naturally producing serotonin and dopamine, and it's traveling through your vagus nerve and telling your brain you're happy, you're full, you're satiated, you're getting full pleasure from this, you don't need more. This seems to be like quite the breakthrough.
absolutely it is. And that's where, again, I keep saying research is focusing on this. Research, it definitely, this is one of the hot topics as well. Because just because serotonin and dopamine are so well popularized, we want to understand what they're doing there. I might add one caveat here, is that they act as caloric sensors and appetite regulators. So does GLP-1, in the sense that if you have a history or a habit or a tendency to overeat because your appetite doesn't get squashed quickly enough, dopamine, serotonin, and GLP-1 in the gut bring it back to normal levels. But it works the other way around as well. If you're not eating enough, so say, for example, if you suffer from anorexia, we've seen GLP-1, dopamine, serotonin in the gut bring it back to normal the other way around as well. So it's not like it helps reduce weight, it just helps normalize weight to a normal baseline, which I think is also equally fascinating.
I think so. One of the things that I've heard, and perhaps you've found this in your studies, and I don't know whether this has been verified through enough clinical research, is that there is such a thing as the Ozempic blues, where your desire has been dulled so much in the brain for anything that you're addicted to, whether it be alcohol, drugs, food, sex, gambling, whatever your addiction is, that there's this kind of a flatline mood that happens as a result of GLP-1. Have you found that in your research, and have you found that that is also related to that gut-brain axis?
Yeah, certainly. What you're describing sounds a bit like emotional blunting, is what we call it. So,
Yes.
an inability to feel too happy, but also too sad.
Mm.
In fact, it's the mechanism behind most antidepressants. So, they reduce the amount of serotonin, also, they modulate the amount of serotonin to bring you into a flat line. And GLP-1s certainly have the capacity to do that. It's why some countries we've seen actually restrict the use of GLP-1 in those that have mental health conditions, simply because we don't know what it's doing to mental health. We do know in the gut microbiome side of things, at least, that it is modulating the gut microbiome. Now, in certain patients, whether it modulates it poorly and makes it a less diverse ecosystem, because you want a diverse ecosystem of bacteria inside you, if it reduces that, then certainly we can see a disruption of the gut-brain axis, the vagus nerve, and similar emotional blunting like side effect through modulation or changing of serotonin and dopamine. So there's definitely some basis behind that. But because GLP-1 is so new and such a hot topic and so much research and money is being put into it, we just haven't quite figured out the full
The
basis
thing that
behind it.
kind of I can hear and I'm sensing is that with the introduction of any new drug, and GLP-1, it's not new, but being used in weight loss and being used increasingly, they're saying, for anti-inflammation throughout the whole body, is that the people who are administering it, which is typically GPs, they're not in a position to track all of this, and they're not trained in gut microbiome. They're not gastroenterologists. They're not researchers. They're GPs who were trained typically before this drug was even available. And the same goes with, HRT. There's such a massive gap between the person who's prescribing medication to you to the person who is living through the side effects with you. And, for an ordinary person, I always say I'm a citizen scientist. I have no medical background, no medical training. And my only interaction is with the experts like yourself, researchers, scientists, doctors, inventors, that this seems to be the biggest problem, that so many things are, prescribed, suggested, promoted, even, we were talking about the probiotics. You could get served 20 ads on probiotics on your social media feed. I'm sure after this conversation, I'll get a million.
Absolutely.
So that part of it is I don't want to say frightening, but it's certainly concerning that the person who is prescribing it for you probably doesn't have the ability to say, make sure you take prebiotics as you're on this journey of weight loss, or I'm prescribing you SSRIs, but you're going to need some prebiotics and you're going to need to remember that your vagus nerve needs attention and your gut microbiome needs attention. Will your research, take me through the train of what happens with research, how long research takes before you reach your conclusions. You can make a definitive, conclusive recommendation to, the medical body.
Yeah, good question, and certainly a good observation as well. People prescribing often are not at all keeping the gut microbiome in mind, let alone the vagus nerve. And so it's why we see patients struggle with side effects, and the GP or the prescriber says, it's fine, keep going, because they don't understand where the side effects are coming from, just that it's part of the drug and it's okay. Weight gain is not too bad, for example. But in
Exactly.
reality, there may be better alternatives, gut safer alternatives. So maybe even the sort of questioning goes right back to the people that make the drugs, making them gut neutral instead of gut disruptive. But in terms of how long the whole process takes from designing a gut neutral medication to having it out in the public, the answer is unfortunately a very, very long time. So it
Mm.
starts with an idea, then you have to test the idea in the lab, see if it's even feasible to make such a compound. Then it's in animals, unfortunately, so potentially, and you see if it's safe, if it works. And then after that, it's multiple clinical trials before you then apply to the medical governing body. So in Australia, that's the TGA, Therapeutic Guidelines Australia, or Therapeutic Goods Australia. So they're the final ones that get a say. So if I was to give you an overall number or an estimate, it would be, say, a decade up to. Some of these medications, certainly, if you're working on the brain, for example, you can imagine there's a lot more hurdles to cross there.
Yeah.
And so they may take multiple decades.
So with that in mind, the research that you're doing at the moment, when will we see your conclusions? When will we see that adopted by the Therapeutics Goods Administration? When will we see that taught to doctors, naturopaths, whoever we're seeing for our wellness? When will we see that in supplements?
Yeah. The exciting thing about this research is that we're not actually changing the drug chemically. The drug is exactly the same. We're changing the way it's delivered to the body. Because as I said, has to go through the mouth, has to go through the gut microbiome. And the exciting thing about that is it reduces the amount of regulatory hurdles that we have to face, because the TGA or the governing body knows the drug is the same. Once it gets past the gut microbiome, it behaves in the same way. And so hopefully the answer is a lot sooner than multiple decades. But again, it depends on exactly how the studies go, exactly what the governing body, what sort of questions they have. The issue with the microbiome research in general is that it's so up and coming, and there's so many what ifs and how does it work, that there are obviously going to be a little bit of hurdles and pushback that we need to overcome. But the concept of taking prebiotics with the medication, anyone can start doing that right now, because the prebiotics are already available, and the medications, of course, they're not changing.
So you must be at some level of confidence and close to resolution if, you've issued a press release and you're able to talk about it. Where do you see your research, this work that you're doing? How close are you to drawing conclusions?
Yeah, so we've already completed the lab part. We've completed the secondary testing, and we've seen a marked reduction in weight loss. Sorry, a marked reduction in weight gain. So those are all exciting enough results for us to sort of publish it, to tell people about it. But the next step will be the clinical study. That will take a few years, and then after that, the idea is we can incorporate this nanocapsule, this sort of prebiotic delivery vehicle, with drugs for people to take. And we first have to go to the actual pharmaceutical companies, tell them, hey, are you interested in taking your drug, putting it in here? And if they say yes, well, then we can start going with basically most drugs that we use already.
Can I ask, do you have, like, generally, not you personally with this research, is there a lack of funding for this kind of research because it disrupts the status quo? How is this research funded?
Yeah, so the funding is primarily done through, for example, the Hospital Research Foundation, sort of governing, so charitable organizations, but as well as government funding. The issue that we've found is that gut microbiome science is so, I guess, all over the place, so poorly understood, that it's hard to make claims that we know we can follow through with funding. And so funding governing bodies are less likely to be interested. Not saying they're not, there certainly are, and any sort of funding that we receive, we're incredibly grateful for. But unlike, say, for example, general mental health research or cancer research, where it's a hot topic, we know sort of how it works, we know what to do, except gut microbiome research, the fact that you're working with 100 trillion bacteria. For context, there are more bacteria in your stomach than there are stars in the night sky. Like 1 kilo of your body weight is just bacteria. So with facts like that, it's hard to sort of acquire funding to be able to start decoding that. But again, new upcoming tools like AI, of course, that
Yes, I was going to
everyone's
ask
been
about AI too.
yeah, sure. So AI, the hottest topic as well. Everyone's been trying to incorporate it, and we certainly are as well, to try to unmap and sort of untangle the 100 trillion bacterial connections. And the way we're doing it is essentially trying to see if we can predict some of these reactions between the drug and the gut microbiome before they occur. So if you go back to the GP situation brought up earlier, imagine a situation where the GP is able to put in the drug that you're about to take a small sample of your gut microbiome, harmonize them together, let AI decide it, and then come back to you and say, hey, this drug we think will work with the fewest side effects.
With
That
this
would be
dose, with this specific dose.
exactly, yes. We want to see this benefit with the fewest side effects possible. Absolutely would be amazing, definitely quite far away from it, because AI in this case is only as good as the data that we feed it to train on. So we're still at the stage where we're collecting high quality, reproducible data in gut microbiome science to feed these AIs so they can go off and make the predictions that we need to be able to translate that to GP practice.
Now, I'm just reminded that the discovery of the H. pylori bacteria
Mhm.
resulted in a Nobel Prize in science. So maybe that's good news for your research. Maybe there is, enough attention on the gut and how it affects us and our health, because the discovery of that connection resulted in a completely transformative way to treat stomach ulcers. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly. And, you're certainly right in saying that it's very exciting. I think it's very easy to sit here and say it's very sad that we don't know much. It's a bit scary. It's a bit daunting, but I think it's interesting to be excited. It's important to be excited because, well,
I'm
you've got
so
so much
excited. That's why I
opportunity.
have you on when I saw that release come through, I thought, oh, I have to have Sri on the show. I really want to talk about this research. It's so promising. And I think, mental health is, the statistics are alarming, and it is a growing, area of concern for governments, for populations around the world, from youth to old. And so the potential for research that's going to markedly improve the delivery, the efficacy of drugs is mind blowing to me, and really worth exploring. Now, I'm at midlife, so I'm hoping that your research findings hit the mainstream in the next few years. But I'm happy for my daughter. She's 15, and this rapid acceleration of science and research can only be exciting and good. As you said, let's focus on the exciting.
Certainly, absolutely. I mean, we're just, as part of learning gut microbiome, you also learn how some drugs work. We don't know some of the drugs and how they work, and we're figuring out actually they work because of the way the gut microbiome interacts with them. So it's so much positive enthusiasm around the space right now. There's so much happiness and excitement about what we can uncover because, as I said, 100 trillion bacteria is a lot to work with. We've got our hands full for quite a while now, and I think it's a very exciting space.
One of the things I just wanted to touch on was your mention of the vagus nerve. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is that the vagus nerve, the introduction of the concept of the vagus nerve was really through alternate health and allied health. They were the first people who started talking about it. Meditation teachers were talking about the vagus nerve. Naturopaths and nutritionists were talking about the vagus nerve. It really didn't come from the traditional medical fraternity. And now, here you are doing a scientific research and you're the first person, you're the first PhD candidate that I've had, or anyone from the medical realm that's talking about the vagus nerve. Similarly, all of my conversations around gut health have been with people in allied health or complementary medicines. I have never had positive news and successful clinical discussions around gut microbiome with anyone inside the scientific or medical community. So is there a reason why there is that lag between these two bodies?
I think it comes down to the fact that, and again, I can't speak for how doctors are educated, but as part of the education system, the gut microbiome is not fully incorporated into physiology in terms
Mm,
of education. So it's very hard for them
neither
to,
is menopause. They might get
exactly,
3 hours of training on menopause, and yet half the population will go through it. So
exactly.
it's wild. But we all have gut microbiome.
Exactly. So, I mean, it comes down to a lack of understanding about the gut microbiome. It's very hard to teach it if you don't know the full basics of how it's working. But in saying that, certainly, for example, naturopaths and allied health have been pioneers of vagus nerve sort of, I guess,
They
healing and
have.
activation. Even things like electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve, that's very up and coming and popular as well. So certainly
And
that is,
gargling, I've heard that gargling and singing can actually, is that correct?
yeah, so because it goes down past that area, all of those activities that you just mentioned can have the potential to stimulate it. I know it's
My
all over
doctor
this.
never told me that. I'm pretty sure TikTok told me.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think the idea behind sort of general practice is very much understand symptoms, diagnose, and if you can or want to, prescribe medication. But the naturopath behavior, the angle, the allied health angle is very much left to the periphery. And I think that's something that needs to change and bringing more of a multidisciplinary approach, especially regarding to microbiome science, but in general, with regards to holistic health as well. So I think it's very important that you brought it up and certainly something that needs to be worked on.
I have one last question for you, and this is related to longevity because obviously biohacking is, the buzzword of the century. Longevity and performance is really something of interest for men, for women, for children. And, all of that conversation started with optimization of athletes, I would say originally, and now it's moved into the mainstream. What role does the gut microbiome have on longevity markers?
Yeah, so the best way to think about it is it's a foundation platform. It's a support tool. So if you have a healthy microbiome by feeding it lots of good nutrients, etc., you're giving your body the best platform it has to be able to then perform its functions. So what I mean by that is, for example, ensuring that your hormones are correct, your inflammation, etc., all of those are kept in line can be done so, sorry, by having a foundation of a good microbiome. So in terms of aging, you want to make sure your microbiome is good so your body has the best chance it can have of aging as gracefully and as healthily as possible.
And to have a sharp mind and a healthy body for as long
Exactly.
as possible.
Exactly. As I
Is
said,
there
yeah, sorry.
any research relating to gut microbiome and Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or any brain degenerative diseases? I know
Yeah,
I said the
certainly.
last question, but I just thought of that.
That's fine. No, they all have the massive bodies of research exploring them. Parkinson's is a really interesting one. We found that the bacteria in our stomach in certain people, certain individuals breaks down a protein in a certain way that protein then travels into the blood, up into the brain, and then triggers Parkinson's sort of condition. So we've seen, I think it's called alpha proteins or alpha amyloids. They're produced by the bacteria in our stomach. We didn't know that until recently. We know that we saw these proteins in the brains of those suffering from Parkinson's. We now know those proteins come from the gut microbiome. So it's part of another reason as to why you might want to have a good microbiome as you age, is so that you reduce your chances of developing neurodegenerative disorders.
Well, I would be remiss to not ask you to repeat once again, what is a good prebiotic that we can just get over the counter to start our journey into a healthy, strong gut microbiome?
So any prebiotic is better than a prebiotic, but if you must have one, a good one that you can go out and buy is called inulin, Inulin. And
So we
it's
can go
made
to our
from,
pharmacy, go to Chemist Warehouse and ask the
of course,
pharmacist, I would like an inulin supplement.
it's made from, I think, artichoke root, so pulverized artichoke root. So it's healthy, it's natural,
It's
and you
vegan.
can certainly vegan, and you can certainly buy it in decent quantities. Put a couple grams into your shake or your water or your meals. Mix it up. It's naturally sweet, so you can barely taste it, if anything. And it's an easy way to get a little bit more protein, a little bit more prebiotic boost into your diet and to aid the gut microbiome inside of you.
I love this conversation. It's been absolutely illuminating, and I'm going to be following your research and studies. And I hope that you will accept my invitation to come back when you have more, a final conclusion to your studies, and let me know where the next steps for uptake will be and how you're going to help dramatically change the way drugs are produced, particularly for mental health. But everything that we've talked about today has been so illuminating, and I really appreciate your time, Shri. Thank you so much.
And certainly, it's been incredibly worthwhile talking to you. I've had a great time. It's been an honor. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thanks, Shri.
Thank you.
Yay!
Okay, was that good?
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel, sign up for our free newsletter, and consider leaving a review and rating it. This really helps the channel grow and reach new audiences.